All right, I'm gonna get us started, and I see that we have a good amount of people that have registered who are in here right now. So thank you guys for taking the time out of your days to be a part of this. We are going over the as-is contract review along with COVID-19 Addendum. My name is Lucie McGuire, and I work for Arrow Title Services as their Business Development Officer. I know quite a few faces in here, and you guys have probably seen me at the Realtors Association when that was a thing, more so. But we've really gone through a lot with this COVID, so I'm glad that we're able to still be able to bring you this valuable information via virtually. We do have Kathy Braid here with Old Republic Title, and she is going to be the person instructing this course. If you guys have any questions whatsoever, feel free to raise your hand or put something into the comments. I will be monitoring that, and then if I see that you have a question, we will call on you, and I'll tell Katie or Kathy that we have a question. So don't feel like you can't ask questions. Feel free to ask anything. And yeah, so that's what we're gonna do with that. If there's any questions in regards to that, just let me know. Now, I just want to introduce Arrow just a little bit before we get started. Again, you know who I am, Lucie McGuire with Arrow Title Services, but Arrow Title started a few years back by Michelle Chart, and she has almost 30 years of experience in this. And we've done so much to grow Arrow in this community. I'm actually born and raised right here in Jensen Beach. So I love this community and have really grown with it through the business aspect of it as well. At Arrow, you know, we do a lot with communication and just trying to be of value to you guys. We just want to be a resource to help you in any which way. If you guys follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, then you guys have seen that we were very active on social media. Now, one of the things that we do, or specifically I should say I do, is if you guys ever need any help with social media, setting up your page, or any of which that if I can help you, feel free to reach out to me. I will be putting my phone number and my email in the chat. You guys should have already gotten an email from me, so you have that information there as well. But I am always here for you. Do not hesitate to ask me any questions that you have. I am happy to help. Honest. We also have like a market update Monday that we do live every single week, and a Thursday's top tips in real estate that we do live every single week. And both of those are hosted at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, obviously where we are. And it is a value that we've tried to bring to the public. So it's where we're highlighting you guys. We're having local realtors come on there and share information about what's going on in the market. So if you guys want to get out there in a different way on social media, we reach about over 1,000 people each week on those videos. So if you guys want that opportunity, it is free for you to have it. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but feel free to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. We post new videos to YouTube all the time. And yeah, just want to get you guys involved, get your face out there, help you. We do shout outs to the people who are involved with that. So it's really just to help promote you and get that information out to the public, because a lot of people don't know what's going on and crazy with our industry right now. So I just wanted to say that I did give you guys the link to our YouTube channel in the email that I just sent about an hour ago. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to put them into the chat. We will be monitoring that, and we hope that you enjoy this. We are going to, again, this topic is as-is contract review along with COVID-19 Addendum. And thank you so much, Kathy Braid with Old Republic Title, our underwriter, for hosting this class with us. We are very excited to have you, and she's awesome. So thank you guys, and I will give the floor to Kathy.
Thank you. Okay, hi everybody, good morning. Welcome. I am going to share my screen with you so that you'll be able to follow along with the contract as we go over it. And as Lucie said, if you have any questions, just go into the chat and you will be able to, I believe I shared that. Hold on for a sec.
Oh, I also sent you guys an email with both of the contracts, or the contract and the addendum that she's going to be going over today too. So if you guys printed that out or wanted that, you have that in your email, just so you know.
Okay. Let's see. So now, there we go. Now my screen. I wasn't sure. Okay. So today we're going to go over the as-is contract because that's the contract that's most frequently used in most transactions. So the most important thing for you to do when you first when you first are meeting with the sellers, right? You're the listing agent, you're going to meet with the sellers. Before you go, you should probably, the best thing to do is to print out the current warranty deed and then go to the property appraiser's office where you can print out their tax bill so that this way you have the right legal description, you have the correct address, you have the address to where the tax bill is sent, you have the address of the property, and most importantly, on the deed of record, you have who the current owners are so that you're certain to be meeting with the correct people. There's a website that you can go to. It's netroonline.com. It's NETRONLINE.com. You'll go in there, you can click on Florida, and then it goes by county. And once you go into that county, you'll be able to see public records. You can click on public records. You can click on the property appraiser's office, the tax collector's office. So it's a good resource for you to be able to print out that information and take it with you when you go on your listing appointment. That way, if you're supposed to be meeting with John and Mary Smith, who are in title, and you're actually meeting with Robert, well, that's a red flag for you. Where are John and Mary? Are they deceased? Did they die recently? Could it be a probate? These are all things that will trigger you to answer the proper questions. And then it will just let that seller know that the title agent will be asking the same questions. And if it is a probate situation, they may have to hire a probate attorney. The closing may be delayed because there are errors all over. There may be issues. So those are things that you can tell them right off the bat. And that really makes you shine. You're like, wow, this person is really a professional. I'm not going to be surprised when the title agent asks me for those types of things. If the property is in a trust, if you see that the property is in a trust, then you would know that to let them know the title agent will be asking for certain papers of the trust, or there may be a certification that they can sign. So again, it just makes you more important. It makes you a resource for them. And Lucie can help you with anything that you possibly need. If you don't have access, or if you don't want to go to Netro Online, I'm sure that Lucie or someone in her office can get those two documents for you, the deed and the current owner deed and the report from the appraiser's office. It's important that the marital status be on the contract as well. So if the deed is John and Mary Smith, husband and wife, it's good to put the marital status on there just because it makes it easier for the title agent. And that would be the same for the buyers. If you're working with the buyers, the marital status is always important because we have homestead issues in Florida. We have homestead rights. We have statutes that we have to follow. If the sale is of a primary residence, even if only one person is in title, their spouse has to join in on that deed. Homestead protects the non-titled spouse. So the non-titled spouse has to consent to the sale of the property. So it's always good if it says John Smith, a married man. If it's their primary residence, you can give him a heads up, ask if it's a primary residence. If he says yes, then just let him know his spouse is going to have to sign. Well, we're divorced. Okay, so that's a whole other issue, but you're giving him a heads up. Same with the buyers. If the buyers are purchasing a primary residence and it's only going to be titled in one person, it's important that they know that the spouse will have to join and sign in the mortgage. They would not have to sign the note because only one person is in, and that one person is probably going to be the only one on the note. But on a primary residence, the spouse, if they're not entitled, still has to join in on the mortgage. It's difficult because people will tell you that they're single, but they're actually still married, they're separated, and that can present a problem, as I'm sure Lucie can attest to, because it's like, what do you mean I have to sign that? I'm not going to be responsible to pay that. I'm not going to live there. I don't even like that person. I don't want to cooperate with them. So these are all little tips that you can give your sellers and buyers a heads up on when you're first meeting with them. Again, you're the professional. Most people don't know this. So it just helps you to shine in their eyes, and then they'll refer you out rather than they get a surprise at the closing table, or not even at the closing table. When when Lucie's office is processing the file, they won't be surprised when they find that out. They'll already have heads up. Property description is very important. Again, property tax collector, appraiser's office, just make sure the information is correct, because we don't want to search the wrong property based on what's on the contract. The title agent may be ordering based on the contract. So it's always important that the legal description and the property address are correct. And there's that website again. It's netroonline.com. You could click public records and then go to in the county where the property is, and you'll be able to get the information there. It's a good resource for you. It's very easy, hands-on. If you have a property that you're selling up in Pensacola and you don't know really what to do, you just go in there, you put it in the county, and you can find out the information you need. So it's a good resource for you. It's important when you have your personal property, it's important to fill this in. It always has been here, but I just like to stress it because, again, any title agent will tell you that sometimes certain things are included or excluded. Most of the time, they think they're included, but it's not actually written down. We all have cell phones now. We all can take pictures. If there's something really unique to the property that the buyer thinks they're getting, make sure that you have it in this section on line 20. I also want to point something else out. Wherever you see a little asterisk next to a number, that means that there's a box or a blank on that line that must be addressed. So it's important to pay attention to that. So if you're looking over the contract, you'll see, wow, on line 20, we have to address if anything specific is included. I had a closing one time when I was working with an agency, a title agency rather than the underwriter. There was a beautiful built-in fish tank. And when you walked into the home, it was on the beach, and they had saltwater fish in there. And the way that it was in the wall and the way that it was all designed was, when you looked into the fish tank, you could see through it into the ocean. So it was almost like, that you were looking at the fish in the ocean. Well, the fish tank was there when they did the walkthrough, but all the fish were gone. So there was a big to-do over how much the buyer wanted a credit for to replace the fish in the tank. Was not included. Fish tank was included, but the fish weren't. I know it's a silly example, but people are silly. They want what they want. So realistically, if it's like a really nice, expensive commercial style oven or stove, like a Viking stove or a Sub-Zero refrigerator freezer type of a thing, and the buyer expects that to be there, then that should be included specifically, because it says, refrigerators, ovens, dishwashers. Well, make sure that you're specific in that so that there are no problems during the walkthrough or the closing. Same with items that are excluded. Purchase price, again, make sure the purchase price and the deposit amounts are correct. If there's any changes, make sure that that's corrected properly with an addendum, especially if there's a lender. Lenders are going to want to know all of the changes. The escrow agent information is very correct. This is the name of the agency or the attorney that's holding the deposit, not the settlement agent, not the agent doing the closing. This can present a problem because if, let's say, Lucie and I are doing a transaction and I'm the buyer, Lucie's the seller. So I'll say, okay, well, I don't want ABC title agency to hold the money. I want my attorney to hold the money. But the title agent or the attorney has put ABC title agency in here as the escrow agent. Well, that can present a problem because now Lucie's agent will call the title agent and say, hey, did you get the buyer's second deposit? And they'll say, what do you mean? I don't have the first deposit. So that can create a problem. So it's very important to put whoever is holding the deposit, that's whose name has to be in here, because they are the escrow agent. The escrow agent may not necessarily be the one doing the closing itself. So that's very important to make sure that you have that correct there so that there's no question. Any questions yet, Lucie? No? Okay.
Yeah. If you
Okay.
guys have questions, feel free to use the raise hand function, or you can type it in the chat.
Okay. Alrighty. All deposits and funds have to be collected at time of closing before any monies can be dispersed. They actually have to be in the escrow account of the title agency doing the closing, because the title agent may have hundreds of thousands of dollars in their account, but they only have X amount of dollars per file. So if the money is not actually in the account, they really can't do any dispersing. So that sometimes creates a problem if the closing is late in the day and the deposit does not, the bank does, if it's financed property and the bank doesn't get the monies in until the next day, it could present a problem. The effective date of the contract was changed. It used to be the last date and time that the buyer and seller signed the contract or initialed the contract, but now it's the date, and it's the date that the last one of the buyer and seller has signed or initialed and delivered the contract or the counter offer. Now, a lot of people don't really, didn't really know that, but if we look at paragraph O, which is on page 10, it actually addresses the date, and it says, notice and delivery given by or to the attorney or broker representing any party shall be as effective as if given by or to that party. All notices must be in writing and may be made by mail, personal delivery, or electronic media. A facsimile or electronic copy of this contract and any signatures thereon shall be considered for all purposes as an original. And it says the contract may be executed by electronic signatures. So let's say Lucy and I are doing a closing again, and John Smith is my agent, my realtor. Lucy signs the contract today. I sign the contract today, but my husband is not here. He doesn't sign the contract until, or we're both not here. So I don't sign the contract today. Lucy signs today. My husband and I are away, right? So Lucy gets the contract. She gives it to her realtor. Her realtor sends it to my realtor. My realtor doesn't send it to me until tomorrow. So my husband and I sign it tomorrow. We send it back to our realtor, and then Lucy gets it. Lucy's away now. So Lucy's realtor gets it the following day. And it would be the same as if Lucy received it. So if Lucy signs on the 4th, I sign on the 5th, I get it back to my realtor who gets it to Lucy's agent. It's actually as if it's been received by Lucy. So the actual effective date would be the 5th, even though Lucy doesn't get it in her hands until the 6th. That's very important because, you know, the effective dates are based on some of the, is not the effective date. Some of the times are based on the effective date. So always confirm what the effective date is. It's not the date that the contract is signed. It's the date that it's delivered to all parties. And the agent can accept it on behalf of their client if their client is not there. So if the agent gets it today and their client doesn't get it until tomorrow, the effective date is still today because the contract says that their real estate agent or their attorney, if they get it, they're accepting it on behalf of their client. Is that clear? Any questions on that, Lucy?
No, no one had mentioned a question about that, but they mentioned the website, which I put into the chat for anybody who needs it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so now I'll go back to page 1. So just always confirm the effective date and do it via email so that everybody's on the same page so that there's no question as to what the effective date is. Because again, people have only a certain amount of days from the effective date to perform certain functions as far as the contract goes. So your closing date is going to be the date that you put in there, and any changes must be in writing, which is standard for anything in the contract. It's always to be in writing, especially if you have an on or before date. Make sure that that date is changed and that everybody is in agreement and that it is in writing, because we know sometimes people don't stand by their word and then we don't want any issues.
Kathy,
And of
we have a
course,
question. Oh, sorry.
okay. No problem, go ahead.
Is the date for the effective date, is the date that is the day it is delivered or the day after? Is the date that day?
It is the
delivered?
day that is delivered.
Delivered.
Yeah. It says delivered, yep.
Sorry, I don't know why I couldn't read
And
there for a second.
Yeah. You can always ask your broker, just to confirm it. And again, it's always best to get everything in writing. It's so easy now to get everything in writing because all we have to do is an email, right? So everybody's doing email back and forth. It's just so much easier. And once we have everything in writing, you keep it there. Should there be any question, I hope it would never have to go to mediation or to law firms or anything else like that. It's in writing, and just make it clear that, this is the date and this is the time frame that we have to perform this function, whether it's to get an inspection or whatever the case may be.
So,
okay, any more questions?
Well, they're saying that their manager says it's the day after.
Okay, well, I was just going to say that. Talk to your broker, and if your manager says it's the day after the day it's delivered, then you go by what your manager says. I'm not an attorney, and this is just for informational purposes only. So best to do what your office says. And there is a legal counsel that realtors have that they can go to as well if they're not sure, or if their broker is not sure. So if it's the day after, if that's what they say, and then you always go by what your manager says. Again, this is for informational purposes only. So if your manager is telling you something different than I'm saying, you have to do what they say because they're your boss. This is just information purposes only. The extension of the closing date, when this changed when the CFPB first came into play because nobody knew how long it was going to take to get documentation. And so what they did was they said, okay, we're going to address the CFPB. So they did that in paragraph A, and that really doesn't come into play too much because the lenders have it down pat now. They have addressed what force majeure is, and they've given a time frame for the closing date extension on that. And when we get to that paragraph, we'll go over it. Paragraph 6 hasn't really changed. Occupancy and possession, unless 6B is checked, there are no tenants or anybody. The seller is the only one that owns the property, so there would be no issue. If paragraph B is checked, then the buyers would have to get copies of the leases within a certain number of days of the effective date. Contract says 5. So again, the effective date is very important for these purposes because there's a certain number of days within that effective date that the buyer has to receive copies of the leases. Assignability, that hasn't changed. Excuse me. This is a section that has changed quite a bit from the original one that we had several years ago. If the buyer is paying cash, you're going to check off paragraph A, which is fine. Everybody loves that. They do a happy dance. Nobody has to worry about lenders. Paragraph B, it's just talking about the type of loan that the buyer is going to get if they're having financing. As I said, anywhere you see a check mark next to a line is a box or a blank that needs to be addressed. So be cognizant of that when you're looking at the section on financing. The buyer then the buyer shall make loan application for financing within blank days after the effective date and use good faith and diligent effort to obtain approval of the loan meeting financing terms. That's your loan approval period. This is a gray area because good faith and diligent effort. Well, the contract then addresses what diligent effort is. They're saying that if the buyer fails to use that diligent effort, it should be considered a default under the terms of the contract. They have a definition of diligent effort that includes but is not limited to the timely furnishing of all documents and information and paying all fees and charges to the lender or the broker. So this is important when you're working with a buyer, especially if you know that the buyer is a procrastinator. It's the buyer that can't make up their mind. You show them, 100 houses and they don't like any. They don't know if they want 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms. They don't know if they want a garage. they're supposed to meet you at 10 o'clock and then they call and they can't meet you until 12. Or you have a first-time home buyer that's not really sure of what the procedure is. So make sure that you explain to them that they do have to follow the contract. They do have a certain amount of time. They do have to have their taxes, whatever the lender requires. You're more familiar with that than I am. So maybe it's 2 years of tax returns. Maybe it's pay stubs. Maybe it's a gift letter. Whatever the lender may need, make sure that the buyer or the broker, make sure the buyer supplies that to them in a timely manner. Ask them not to go out and purchase furniture before they purchase their home. They shouldn't be purchasing a car. They shouldn't be running up their credit. They shouldn't have a lot of, dings on their credit score. So especially first-time home buyers may not know all this stuff. So it's very important that you are familiar with it so that you can let them know what they would need to supply. The buyer will keep the seller and the seller's broker fully informed of the status of the mortgage. So again, that's just going to be between the two agents, keep following up. If the buyer, upon the buyer obtaining that loan approval, they'll promptly deliver written notice as such to the seller. So again, this is what the brokers do back and forth. The buyer's not going to send directly to the seller, hey, I got my loan approval. That's for the brokers. Just make sure that you're on top of that. Set up maybe a little tickler, making sure that the buyer is getting the information or that you're getting the information from the buyer and to the seller's agent as soon as possible. This is an important clause here on line 104. If the buyer is unable to obtain their loan approval after they do exercise their diligent effort, then any time prior to the expiration of the loan approval period, the buyer may provide written notice to the seller stating that they have been unable to obtain that loan approval, and they either waive the loan approval, in which event the contract will continue as if they have received that loan approval, or they can terminate the contract. So then we get into another clause here. It says, if the buyer fails to timely deliver either notice that they have received their loan approval or that they want to cancel the contract, if they don't deliver that notice prior to the seller prior to the expiration of the loan approval period, then the loan approval shall be deemed waived, in which event the contract will continue as if the loan approval has been obtained. Provided, however, the seller may terminate this contract by delivering written notice to the buyer within 3 days after the expiration of the loan approval period. So again, make sure that your buyer either gets the mortgage, gets that loan approval, lets everybody know, right? If they don't let anybody know in that time frame, then it's just going to be deemed or assumed that they got the loan approval and everything is going to proceed as if they did. Or they can cancel that contract if they know they're not going to get a loan. If they have really, really bad credit and they know they're not going to get a loan, then they are allowed to cancel the contract within the time period allotted by the contract. If the contract is timely terminated as provided by the paragraphs, then the buyer is not in default of the contract, then the buyer would be refunded their money and releasing buyer and seller from the contract. If the loan approval has been obtained or deemed to have been obtained as provided above, and the buyer fails to close, then the deposit shall be paid to the seller unless failure to close is due to the seller's default or inability to satisfy contingencies of the contract. Properly related conditions of the loan approval have not been met, except for conditions waived by other provisions of the contract, or the appraisal of the property obtained by the lender is insufficient to support the terms of the loan. So again, make sure that you're on top of your buyer, they do the right thing. Basically, this paragraph is saying they have to use diligent effort. They have to notify their agent would notify the listing agent if the loan is approved. If the contract is going to be terminated because they cannot get the mortgage, that has to be in writing and it has to be within that time frame as outlined in the contract. If the buyer does not notify the seller that they cancel the contract, or they got their loan approval, it's just going to be assumed that they got it, and then they would proceed as if they did get it. If they can't close, if they can't get another mortgage, if they can't pay cash or whatever, they may lose their deposit. So again, this is very important. You can go over this with your broker as well if you don't understand it. But it's an important portion of the contract. Any questions, Lucy? No? Okay, good. Okay, closing costs and fees and charges. Seller's going to pay traditionally, well, they always pay the doc stamps. Oh, let me preface it with this. Everything is negotiable, okay? Everything in the contract is negotiable. So this is what the contract says that the seller should be paying. They're going to pay the doc stamps and any surtax on their deed. They're going to pay the owner's policy and charges if paragraph 9C1 is checked. And it's customary in certain counties for the buyer to pay the owner's policy or the seller to pay the owner's policy. In Palm Beach County, it's customary for the seller to pay. Broward and Miami-Dade, it's customary for the buyer to pay. So again, it just depends. Most of the counties in Florida, the seller pays for some reason, but it's always negotiable. So you would have to see what paragraph is checked, A, B, or C. Title charges if paragraph 9C3 is checked. Municipal lien search if 9C1 or 3 is checked. This has to do with maintenance because again, this is an as-is property, so you don't have any clauses for wood destroying organisms, permits, or general repairs. But there is a certain standard of maintenance that must be obtained, must be retained and required from the time the contract is signed through the closing date. They'll pay any estoppel fees, any recording fees for any outstanding judgments or mortgages or anything like that that needs to be paid, any seller's attorney fees, and any other items that may be outstanding. And that would be put here if it was a special assessment maybe, or you could put it on an addendum, or you could put it in the additional comments section of the contract. Sometimes people will put here any open expired permits and utilities or code violations, or they'll put it at the end. So it just depends on where you want to put something that's particular that the seller should be paying that may not show up in a title search. Cost to be paid by buyer, taxes and recording fees on notes and mortgages. You have doc stamps that have to be paid on the mortgage and intangible tax. You have to record the deed and the mortgage, so the buyer's going to be paying for that. Owner's policy and charges, if 9C2 is checked, they'll pay for their survey. Of course, they're going to pay for their lender's policy and endorsements. Again, everything is negotiable. Application for the condo or management company, municipal lien search, if 9C2 is checked, any loan expenses, appraisals, inspections, attorney's fees, property related insurance. And if 9C3 is checked, that's the Miami-Dade and Broward section paragraph, then they would be paying for their owner's policy and their premium for their owner's policy. This is important. Title agents take care of this. Excuse me. At least blank days. So it's 15 days if there's financing and 5 days if it is cash. Prior to the closing date is the title evidence deadline. So that title insurance commitment and any copies of the instruments would be sent to the buyer. The title agent knows this and they get that to the buyer as soon as they get it in. Usual turnaround time from the time they order that commitment is between 48 and 72 hours. So again, they get it to the buyer as soon as possible so that they can review the commitment. The commitment lists who owns the property, who's buying the property, the legal description, any type of requirements that have to be taken care of. Maybe it's a corrective deed, maybe it's pay off a mortgage, maybe it's pay off a judgment. Do they need a survey? Those types of things. And then it shows any exceptions to coverage. We're going to insure you except for that easement that your driveway is encroaching upon in front of the house or any restricted use areas. So again, most of the time, the public doesn't know what to do with the commitment, so they'll call the title agent and they will explain that this, contract says you have to have it. And we're taking care of everything so that you have clear and marketable title when you purchase your home. You can sell it the very next day. And should there be any type of a claim, the underwriter if it is a real claim, the underwriter will defend them up to the amount of that policy. So if you have a $500,000 policy, they're going to defend you up to $500,000. And that's on your purchase price. Usually it's on the purchase price. So as the paragraphs above said, if number 1 is checked, 9C1, the seller is going to designate the agent and pay for the owner's policy and charges. If 9C2 is checked, the buyer is going to choose the closing agent and pay for the owner's policy and charges. And Miami-Dade County, again, if it's Miami-Dade County, the seller is going to furnish a copy of their owner's policy. If they have it, they're going to pay for the title search and they're going to pay for the municipal lien search. Okay. And the buyers pay for their own title insurance policy and their lender's policy. That's Miami-Dade and Broward.
Didn't you say that that Miami-Broward buyer pays usually?
Buyer, oh, did I say the seller? The buyer pays. Yeah, Miami-Dade and Broward, it says buyer shall obtain and pay for the post-closing continuation and premium for buyer's owner's policy, and if applicable, buyer's lender's policy. So the buyer is going to choose the title agent and pay for the owner's policy and their lender's policy in Miami-Dade and Broward County.
Okay, and then you said Palm Beach County is customary for seller, right?
Customary for seller.
Yeah.
But
Someone, well, go ahead.
I was going to say everything is negotiable. So
Yeah.
it's important as the agent that you check off the proper box, because I have, some agents call me and say, well, they didn't check any off, but it's customary in Palm Beach County for them to pay. Well, no, you have to tell them who's going to be paying. So you have to check the box. You can't just assume that it's okay. So it's important to discuss that, who's paying for what.
Yeah,
So
and I think that's a negotiable factor that a lot of people aren't aware of, or just kind of look over. Like they think, oh, well, it's customary for this. And it's like, no, that's a negotiation tool in your box to be able to utilize that, because that's a chunk of money that can be, utilized in the contract. But someone had asked about
Yeah.
that.
Right. And if, of course, you're the selling agent, right? So you don't want your buyer to pay. So of course you're going to say, well, the seller's supposed to pay. In Miami-Dade and Broward County, if the seller's used to paying, then maybe they'll say, well, I pay for the owner's policy. Well, okay, that's fine. You can do that. So it just depends. It is a negotiating tool that you can use. You can try. Maybe they'll do it. Maybe they won't. Okay. Honor before the title evidence deadline. And you remember what the title evidence deadline is. It's 15 days prior to closing, right? If there's a loan, and 5 days prior to closing if it's cash. The buyer may at their expense have a property survey done, certified by a surveyor. It has to then be certified to the title agent, to the underwriter, the buyer, and the lender if there's a lender. Title agent orders that on behalf of the buyer. So they order that. Again, when you're on your listing appointment, here's another tip. Besides the deed and the report from the tax collector's office or the property appraiser's office, ask the seller if they have a copy of their survey and their owner's title insurance policy. The survey is a help because that will give you and the buyer an idea of any issues that may be there. And the title insurance policy assists in the title search. So when you send the contract into Lucie's office, if you send a copy of that policy, it will assist the examiner, because the examiner does not have to go back 30 years. They would only have to go back to the date of that policy. So if the policy is 10 years old, they would have to go back 10 years, right? So it just makes the examination easier. And should there be something that's not satisfied, if there's a mortgage that was supposed to be paid and it's still outstanding, then the title agent, Lucie's office, could then go to that other underwriter and say, hey, we have an issue here. And then she would talk to our underwriting, and there could possibly be an indemnification letter to satisfy it. So it does assist in the search and getting the file closed. Home warranty, again, if there's one, then you would check off the box. Any special assessments, these are not homeowners association assessments, but they are assessments that are done by a public body. So again, it depends. Their assessments, they can show up on the tax records. They can show up in different places. You're going to be asking the seller if they know of any special assessments. If there are, then if the most recent estimate of the assessment by an improvement, which is substantially complete as of the effective date, but that has not resulted in a lien being imposed on the property before closing, the buyer shall pay all other assessments. If special assessments may be paid in installments, then the seller is going to pay the installments due prior to closing. Buyer's going to complete it after closing, or the seller shall pay the assessments in full. So again, you would know that just by your research of the property, if there are any special assessments there, and then you would check off the appropriate box. Your disclosures, these are the same. Permit disclosure, except as disclosed by the seller to the buyer in writing, the seller doesn't know of any improvements that were done without the required permits or made pursuant to permits which have not been closed. Next week, we're going to do a presentation on municipal lien searches and permitting. So I'm not going to go into this in detail today. We'll go into it next week. But just know, ask the seller, this is just if you're not going to be with us next week. Most importantly, if you know that it's supposed to be a 2-bedroom house and you go in there and there are 3 bedrooms, then that's a red flag to ask the seller, did you do this? Did you make this improvement? Has it been inspected? Is it okay? Blah, blah, blah. If they say, no, I bought the house that way, well, that can be an issue. It can be an issue. So just be aware of that. Because sometimes if improvements are done without permits and then there's a property inspection, there may be an issue because what if that was not inspected? And what if at some point in time, somebody reports them or whatever, and they determine that that is not something that could be done, or the electric isn't up to code, or whatever the case may be, it can present issues. So again, always, if you see that there's an addition, you can ask. If you go in, you see that the garage is now, man cave or something like that, that can be a red flag as well. But we're going to discuss that in more detail next week. Flood elevation certificate. That used to be something that was ordered when you ordered a survey. It was a separate piece. It was something that had to be paid for separately, but now most surveyors include them along with their survey. This is only important if you're in an area where the property is located in a special flood hazard or a Coastal Barrier Resources Act designated area. And in those areas, if the lowest flood elevation of that building or for flood insurance rating purposes is below the minimum flood elevation or is ineligible for insurance coverage through the National Flood Insurance Program or private insurance, the buyer may terminate the contract by delivering written notice to the seller blank days after the effective date. So again, if there is an issue, if it's in one of those areas, it's a good idea to ask if the seller has flood insurance. I don't know of any special flood hazard areas or Coastal Barrier Resources Act designated areas in the area where we live in. There may be some, but I'm just not aware of it. I know up in the Pensacola area up there, I was in Destin several years ago, and there's a beautiful area with these magnificent homes along the beach. And that is one of those coastal barrier areas where they could not obtain flood insurance. And the homes were multi-million-dollar homes. So if they got washed away, they had no flood insurance. But again, that's up to, you should know the areas that you're in and if they're in those special flood hazard areas. Energy brochure, those items haven't changed. FERPTA, we're going to talk about the last paragraph as well. We're going to go into FERPTA. And I believe we have a FERPTA. Do we have a FERPTA presentation scheduled as well, Lucie?
I will double check. I know we got a few scheduled.
Wait, I have your list right here. That was silly of me. Oh no, we have survey. We have municipal liens and survey, but we can set one of those up as well, and we can go into it in further detail. But as far as the contract goes right now, for our purposes, the seller is supposed to notify the buyer in writing if they are a U.S. citizen or if they're a foreign person. Well, if they're a foreign person. So here's another little tip when you go on your listing appointment. Just ask the seller, are you a US citizen? If they say yes, that's great. If they say no, ask them if they're a resident alien and let them know. If they say yes, the title agent will need to see a copy of their resident alien card. If they're not, then suggest they see a tax professional immediately. It will just assist. As much money may not have to be collected. Maybe no money has to be collected. But again, that's only something a tax professional can do. So always ask them that. It is uncomfortable, but it's something that needs to be discussed when you're at your listing appointment, and let them know that the title agent is going to be asking them as well. And that they won't be surprised when the title agent asks them, and let them know that if they are not a US citizen, if they're a resident alien, then the potential for 15% of the sale price, not their proceeds, 15% of the sale price have to be collected and sent into the IRS until taxes are filed the following year. So that money, let's say it's $15,000, will be sitting there, not collecting interest for that seller for a year or over a year, depending upon what month they close. So again, it's important that if they are a foreign person, they seek the advice of a tax professional. You should let them know. If they don't have one, I'm sure Lucie has one she can recommend. I know that there's one called FERPTA Solutions. They're located in Cape Coral. They're accountants, and that's all they do. They only do FERPTA transaction. They only do FERPTA, so they can help the people get a tax ID number. They can do a lot of different things. Okay, seller's disclosure, that's standard. That would be filled out. Property inspections and the right to cancel. Again, this is where the effective date is important. So that's why it's always important to get the effective date in writing. If it's left blank, then the buyer shall have, if left blank, 15 days after the effective date to have their inspections done. So again, when they get the inspection back, then they make the decision what they're going to do. Unless the buyer exercises the right to terminate granted herein, the buyer accepts the physical condition of the property and any violation of governmental, building, environmental, and safety codes, restrictions, or requirements. So again, the buyer can't come back and say, hey, I didn't know about this. I didn't know that there was a code violation, and that code violation is, $300,000. It happens. It's crazy. And again, we're going to talk about municipal liens and code violations next week.
Kathy,
Well,
one
Okay.
second. Someone had mentioned, how does one mention FERPTA without offending them by their accent color, that gray area?
Correct.
I don't know if you have a suggestion for that, but I would just, if I were you, and you're going through the contract with them, you can go through those sections, and then when you get to FERPTA, be like, oh, so this is only applicable if you are not a citizen of the US. And then you can be like, you're a citizen of the US, correct? And they could say yes, and then or no, and then that's when you can have that conversation and kind of bring it up lightly. Do you have any?
Yep, and it's important to discuss these paragraphs of the contract. You know, it really is, because again, they can come back and say, hey, well, I didn't know that, and nobody told me. And now you're telling me that you have to collect $150,000 of my money that I'm supposed to get, because don't forget, it's not based on their proceeds. It's based on the contract sales price. So these are things that, or blame it on the Patriot Act, just say, well, you can't really, you have to be very careful. You're right. In this time frame that we're in right now, you have to be very careful. So as you're going over the different paragraphs of the contract, it's important to go over that one. And it's important to do that with the buyer as well, because if you have a foreign buyer, a non-resident buyer purchasing from a non-resident seller, that buyer needs a tax identification number called a TIN. It's just like a social security number, looks just like a social security number, but it's not. So they both need to have them. And again, you're doing them a favor by having them seek the advice of a tax professional. Because based on certain things there, and I don't want to get into it too much, based on certain things, that tax professional may be able to say, you know what, because of this, and this, we don't have to collect any money from you. And guess what? It's the buyer's responsibility to make sure this is done, not the title agent. And the IRS can put a tax lien on the property for $150,000, for $10,000, or whatever is due. And the buyer has to pay it when they sell the house. Or, you know, the seller can be contacted, but if the seller is in another country, it may be very hard to get the money. So these are things that have to be discussed at the listing appointment when you're going over the contract. And have a FIRPTA addendum available when the contract is going to be signed, because that's the notification in writing that the seller is a foreign person, and everybody's covered, right? There are no surprises. Okay, so that's your walkthrough. Again, this is an as-is contract. So the seller does not have to give any money toward bringing something up to code or having that permit closed out. They don't have to expend any monies because it's as is, unless that's negotiated. But they do have to cooperate. They have to give the buyer, if they did do the work and it was not examined, they do have to give the buyer copies of any plans or any information that they have on that upgrade, or on the item that was where the permit was not closed out. Escrow agent, again, as I said, the monies have to be collected in order for it to be dispersed. These items are really legal types of things, what the buyer has to do. Any questions on these things, default resolution would actually be for your discussion with your broker. Again, I basically go over the stuff that affects you and us as title agents or as an underwriter to make it easier for you to understand what our job is, and just to give you a little assistance as far as, you know, those little asterisks by the paragraph, etc. Title evidence, again, we give that, send that to the buyer within the time period. Survey, we discussed the survey. If there is no ingress and egress, if the survey shows that that property is landlocked, let's say it's a large piece of property and the buyer wants to purchase something in the middle of it, well, that would be considered landlocked unless there's some type of an agreement where the buyer can pass over the property of another person to get to the property that they purchase. And the only way you would know that is by a survey. Talks about lease information. It talks about any types of liens. The seller is going to furnish with the buyer an affidavit. The title agent prepares that affidavit saying that they haven't started any work on the last 90 days that constitutes a lien on the property. So the title agent prepares that, takes care of that. Force majeure, we talked about in the contract, it's the paragraph number 5. Again, if there is some type of a major issue, floods, hurricanes, extreme weather, whatever the case may be, wars, acts of terrorism, whatever. So any period, all time periods, including the closing date, will be extended a reasonable time up to 7 days after the force majeure no longer prevents performance under the contract. If force majeure continues to prevent performance under this contract more than 30 days beyond the closing date, then either party may terminate the contract by delivering written notice to the other, and the deposit would be returned to the buyer, releasing everyone from the contract. Again, thank God, knock on wood, we haven't had any bad hurricanes, but this came into play after, I believe it was Hurricane Wilma. So there were some issues there, and they addressed it in the contract. The location of the closing is going to take place in the county unless in the county where the properties are located, unless everyone agrees to the differences to a different county. Again, a lot of times now closings aren't taking place in person. We're seeing a lot more remote notarizations. So that's a possibility. And Lucie, if you want to have a presentation on that for the realtors as well, if you want, we can do a presentation on Iran so that they understand the process and the requirements based on Florida statutes.
Absolutely. And we actually have a short video on our YouTube channel, just kind of outlining some very quick things. But yeah, I'll get that on the schedule as well. Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, it's detailed. I do them, so I'm really familiar with it, you know, with all the things that have happened. And it's good for the realtor to understand it as well, because that can be an option for their client, you know, if they're in another.
Absolutely.
You know what, if you don't want to fly here, or you don't want to go to see a notary there because of the, you know, the issues that we have with our health issues now, it's another flag for you.
It's another level of service.
It is. It's another level of service. And, you know, I'm fortunate enough to work for an underwriter. So I'm doing this on behalf of the underwriter as an added service that we provide to our agents. So it just makes it better, because the agent knows who the notary is, you know, and knows if they're going to be professional or not. So it's a good thing all around. And it's, I believe, much more secure than a face-to-face, believe it or not, much more secure than face-to-face, because of what they have to go through before they can even see their documents to sign. But we'll talk about that. Okay. FinCEN, that is something that has to do with certain areas. It's Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. If the property is over a certain amount, which is $300,000, and the owner is a single owner LLC, and the money, and it's being paid for by all cash, then it has to be reported to the Treasury Department, and the title agent usually takes care of that, and they notify the people up front. It's a pain in the neck, but they found that terrorist organizations were purchasing properties, laundering money, and then turning around and selling them and laundering the money that way to get money, cash, to do things that are a little unsavory. Escrow procedure, prorations. As far as your tax prorations, I'm sure everybody's familiar with it. Taxes are going to be prorated based on the current year's taxes. So again, we're closing now in January. So they're going to collect taxes from January 1st through the closing date. Everybody's going to sign a paper. Buyer's going to get the entire tax year in January, in November. They're okay with that. But if we're closing in October, the buyer's going to get a credit from January 1st through the closing date in October. And then in November, they're going to get the whole year's tax bill, and they're going to call up Lucie's office and say, hey, or they're going to call up you as the realtor. Why am I paying the whole year? I just bought this house. I should only be paying from my closing date through December. But what they forget, even though they signed a paper that they understood it, is they're getting a credit from the seller for the amount of time that the seller owns the property. So again, something that you can explain to the seller and the buyer when they are signing the papers. So some of these highlighted paragraphs give you an idea of some of the things that you should be discussing with your client as they're signing the contract or before. 1031 exchange, if for investors, again, it's something that takes place prior to closing. But if you find
Oh, can you guys hear me?
it's not really that critical, we can actually take care of it. So always find out if it's an investment property when you're at your listing appointment, if you know they're an investor, and if they're going to do a 1031 exchange. We talked about paragraph O with the delivery date. FARPTA, again, we talked about this a little bit. We're going to go into detail. If the seller of the U.S. property is a foreign person, then the IRS requires the buyer, it says, requires the buyer of the real property to withhold 15% of the amount realized, which is the sale price by the seller. And that money has to be sent to the IRS within 20 days of the closing. The title agent does it on behalf of the buyer. They collect and hold the money, send it into the buyer. If the buyer is not a foreign, if the seller is not a foreign person, they're going to fill out an affidavit, a non-foreign affidavit. It will have the social security number. The title agent will keep that in the file, and everything's fine. If the seller, the foreign seller, sends a withholding certificate for a reduced amount of money to the IRS and it comes back, the seller has received notice that nothing has to be collected, and it's approved by the IRS, then that's good enough. The title agent will keep that in their file, will not withhold anything, and give a copy to the buyer so the buyer has it should there be any issue in the future. If prior to closing the seller has done that, sent it into the IRS, but it hasn't come back, the full amount has to be withheld at closing. And I don't want to go into it in too much detail because we're going to do a presentation on it. If you do have a question, I'm sure Lucie can answer any question that you have on that. I know she's experienced enough to be able to assist you with that. So again, just know as soon as you're doing your paperwork, just let them know when you get to that FERPTA paragraph, if they are not a US citizen, they need to seek the advice of a tax professional as soon as possible. And then you can take them to this last paragraph of the contract and let them know that maybe 15% would have to be withheld. Or they could get a withholding certificate with the accountant for a lesser amount. So that's going to really trigger them to say, hey, I want to see that person because I don't want them to collect all that money. I want them to either collect none, if it's possible and legal, or a smaller amount. So it just really helps everybody. And again, it's a good tool for you to have in your toolbox. Of course, if the seller doesn't have enough money to meet that withholding amount, then they would have to bring money to closing. And then you have your addendums, so you would check it off. Additional terms, again, that's anything you want to put there. I know a lot of agents in Miami-Dade, especially Miami-Dade, because they still have so many open permits and code violations, et cetera, from Hurricane Andrew, believe it or not. They'll put in here if they want the seller to be responsible, seller to close any open expired permits and, satisfy any code violations. So again, when we talk about permits, we'll go over that. And then of course it would have to be signed by everyone, dated, brokers, your listing agent, everything needs to be signed. You'd be surprised, title agents will call me and say, well, nobody signed the contract. Well, how can you get a contract with nobody's signature? That's not a contract. That's just a blank piece of paper with some check marks and some notes on it. So again, make sure that you're sending it to the buyer. You're sending the right one, the correct one. It's signed by everybody. Everything's filled in to the title agent, to Lucie's office, so that it will be easier for them and for everyone to get the transaction started and completed. With COVID, there was a COVID addendum that was sent out, and really it's an easy addendum, right? You're going to fill out the same information, and then it's giving you the option here to, if not yet passed or expired, the following dates or time periods are hereby amended. So if you feel that it may be an issue because of COVID, all of your important periods that are based on the effective date, based on this date, that date, can be completed here and filled in. Association approval might be difficult as well. Not everybody is technologically savvy. Not everybody has access to a laptop or a computer with a camera. So again, if the association is not doing in-person interviews or approvals, ask your buyer, do you have access to it? You may have to be with the buyer. Maybe bring your laptop there, and be with them when they do it if they don't have access to a laptop. So again, it's just something that's there. It's a good idea to go over this, if you think that there may be some issues. And if there are, then you can always fill this out and extend the dates based on illness or whatever the case may be. So do we have any questions? Lucie?
I don't see any coming in. Is everybody good with all of that? All right, and I will also have that information from this video on our YouTube, but I wanted to do a giveaway, guys, before you guys leave and get off, because we all like giveaways. And just because there's COVID doesn't mean you can't enjoy wine. Actually, I think you enjoy wine more now, right, guys? So
yeah.
a bottle of wine, a little, it's hard for you guys to see it in here, a little tumbler, little gift bag. So if everyone wants to put in the chat a number, pick a number, any number between 1 and 200. I'm thinking of a number, and the closest one gets it. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and thank you so much, Kathy, for being here and sharing with us all of that information. It was very valuable, I'm sure, for everyone. And I'll put, after everyone's done putting their number in there, I will put my information in the chat again if anybody has any questions. You guys have my email as well. I know a couple of questions came through my email too. So. All right. Everybody put their number in between 1 and 200. Five more seconds. 1 or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. All right. Let's see who was closest. Looks like there's a couple people that were close. My number was 152, so it's Donna Mann, it looks like. Yeah. Awesome. So Donna, I will get this to you. And we'll connect. If you want to go ahead and put your email in the chat, I should have it. I have it right here, actually. Donna Mann. Yep, I've got it. All right. So guys, thank you so much for being a part of this. And here is my information in the chat. If anybody has any questions, this is my direct line. So you guys can reach out to me. That's my cell phone number at any point in time. If you ever have any questions, I am here for you. Again, with the social media, I'm here for you as well with that. Feel free to call, text me, whatever it might be. And if you guys, again, are interested in joining our Market Update Mondays or Thursdays Top Tips in Real Estate, we would be happy to have you guys join and get your face out there a little bit more in this crazy market. All right. You guys have an amazing rest of your day and weekend. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you, again, next week. So we have a couple of classes coming up for next week through Martin County Realtors Association. So make sure you guys check them out. Next week on Friday at 11 a.m. is going to be municipal lien searches and permitting issues. And then we have a class in February that's for boundary lines. So hope you guys will join us for that as well. Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.